Now let's start setting up our machine. So I'm using a jeans needle, and then one spool of regular polyester sewing thread in color matching the fabric, and then two identical spools of regular polyester thread to use as a top stitching thread. So instead of using specifically top stitching thread, I'm going to use two identical spools of regular thread. So I'll just place both these spools in this thing that I have. So, and then I will hold both threads and just thread them together through the machine. Okay, so by doing this, you will get the effect of a top stitching thread, but with the ease of sewing regular thread. So just thread both together through the needle, as you see here. And then every time that I'm going to sew with a top stitching thread on top, this is what I will be using. Then for the bobbin, just use the regular thread that matches the fabric. So in my case, I'm using dark blue as a regular thread and the top stitching. So now transfer the markings of the back pockets to the fabric. Just lay the back pattern with wrong sides together on the table, and then you just place some pins and use tailor's chalk to mark where the pockets will be. So I just used a bit of tailor's chalk, and then I just do these markings here, only in these corners, and then on the other side. So you should put these markings on the right side of the fabric, where you will be placing the pockets. So just mark the top of the pocket and then the corners, and that's it. Now you can remove the paper piece. Just remove it, and then you can just draw the corners over here again. So the pocket markings are done. Now open out the back pieces and with the right side up, and also open out the back yoke pieces. Arrange them also with the right side up on top of the back. And now the wider part of the back yoke is the one that will match the center back. So don't sew them the other way around. Now hold them and align them wrong sides together. So just hold them like this and pull them wrong sides together and pin them. Now there's one important thing to note here, is that the seam allowance here is going to be 2 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. So the edge needs to match at the seam line, not on the cut edge. Okay, so on the seam line, both pieces should match each other, and you should have a small point hanging out. Okay, so now pin it in place, pin everything in place, and then do the same for the other yoke. So hold both pieces and then match them wrong sides together. Wrong sides together, and now match the pieces along the sew line, which is, remember, 2 centimeters down from the cut edge, meaning 5/8 of an inch. And pin it in place. Now you are going to sew along here and here with top stitching thread. So let's go to the machine. You should have the back on top and the yoke on the bottom. And you should sew with the top stitching thread. Make it a longer straight stitch when you are sewing with the top stitching thread, so that the stitches are prettier. If you do a short straight stitch, it will not look very nice. So I usually use a 3.5 straight stitch when I'm sewing top stitching. This is what it looks like on the right side and then on the back. So now on to press everything. Just press as you sew. So press everything, and then you should press the seam allowance up towards the yoke. So press it really well to hold everything. Press the yoke up and the seam allowance up also. Now we're going to do a flat felt seam. To do that, you will need to trim away half of the yoke seam allowance. So make sure you are only cutting the yoke seam allowance, okay, not the back seam allowance. So trim away half of this, like this. You should trim it. And now we're going to the iron again. So press it again. And then fold the back pieces seam allowance, covering the trimmed seam allowance. So you are folding the larger one so that it covers the trimmed one, okay? And then you flip it up again. So sometimes it's easier this way. So you have the bigger seam allowance, you just fold it over, covering the other one, and then you fold everything again so that the raw edges are all hidden. So all the seam allowance raw edges are enclosed now. Just press it really well, and then we're going to pin it just to hold everything in place, and then you are going to sew with the top stitching thread again. So now do the same for the other leg. So press the yoke and the seam allowance up. Everything is pressed up. Now trim away half the seam allowance of the yoke, like this. And now tuck that seam allowance right under the other one, or better yet, fold the seam allowance to cover all the raw edges, so that all the raw edges are enclosed, and press really well to hold everything in place. This will make a flat felt seam, which is a very strong seam, and you usually find this on the back yoke and on the center back of jeans. Now pin it so that it doesn't move, and after it's pinned, you're going to top stitch close to this fold and parallel to the first top stitching. After it's all sewn, Give it a good press, and that's it. So the back yolks are now sewn. See, it looks really pretty both on the outside and on the inside, and it's a very strong seam. Okay, so that's it for the back yoke.